welcome to The Drum. I'm Peter Lloyd. Coming up tonight, the $30 million lifeline to the cattle industry. Is it enough? Why Tony Abbott's accusing the Prime Minister of being tricky on the carbon price, and should the cane be banned in all schools? Well, our panel tonight is Fiona Ellis-Jones from ABC News Radio, the former Liberal MP Ross Cameron, and social commentator and author Jane Caro. 3 weeks after the live export ban to Indonesia that's left the Australian cattle industry reeling, there's been some more financial help to ease the pain. During her visit to Darwin today, the Prime Minister announced an assistance package worth $30 million, and that's on top of what's already been offered.
This is a package to meet the short-term hardship that the industry is facing now. It is a package which will enable people to get direct monetary support. It will enable people to get an immediate injection of $5,000, and it will enable them to make a further claim for $20,000 against expenditure in their business.
Well, the cattle industry has welcomed the help, but producers want urgent action to restore the live export trade. And Julia Gillard has made it clear that won't happen until the welfare of animals is assured. Well, Fiona Ellis-Jones, how much is being forked out in bailouts?
Well, in addition to the $30 million that was announced by the Prime Minister today, there was $3 million announced by the Agriculture Minister Joe Ludwig on Monday. In addition to that, the Cattle Council announced $5 million earlier. The difference, though, today's announcement is not going to be means tested. So $5,000 initially up to all cattle producers, truckers, even the helicopter choppers involved in mustering, with grants up to $20,000 to follow. Julia Gillard stressed today, though, that this is a short-term measure. All
right, Jane, now among your many hats is that of beef producer. What do you make of the latest offer?
Well, they have to do something to help people who've been caught in this situation. But I still remain, and I mean, yes, my husband and I are beef producers, not for live export, thank goodness, but I still remain absolutely astonished that the AMLC, for example, allowed this situation to get to this point. I mean, animal activists, we know that they're out there and they're doing their job very, very well. Surely they should have done something about this situation long before it got to this, because the problem is that the government's stuck between a rock and a hard place. If they do something about the awful situation of the live export trade, then a whole lot of people can't, make their living as they want to. And if they don't do anything, or they don't do it properly, or they kind of try and do a quick fix and hope everyone will forget about it, there is no way those animal activists aren't going to go back to those abattoirs and check it out. So I just think that this is an industry that has fallen down on the job totally. People must have known those cruel conditions were there. They must have realised they were going to pay a price. It's just basic marketing to have thought about that. Why didn't they?
Ross Cameron?
Well, I think the bigger concern, the Cattlemen's Association may bear some culpability, but I think there's been a lot of frustration with Joe Ludwig's performance as Minister. He apparently had concerns, he says, in January, but did nothing until now. So we see too little action too early, and then this blanket knee-jerk sort of obliteration of the industry once the crisis arrives. And the concern, I think, of the industry, who don't care at all, are not interested in the size of the package, they're interested in the speed of getting the trade going again. It's $1 million a day being lost. And the big concern is you now have Senator Xenophon and I think Andrew Wilkie have introduced a bill to permanently ban live cattle exports. We know that, for example, one of the incoming Greens, Lee Rihannan from New South Wales, is the patron of the New South Wales vegans, so she's not going to be in any hurry to get the trade going again. We know significant elements in the Labor Left caucus want it permanently banned, and so there's a feeling that if it goes slow for long enough, the wet season will arrive and the industry will be permanently damaged.
Sure, but the Prime Minister, in her comments in Darwin today, she said that the hardship package was a short-term measure with the reopening of the trade, the long-term goal, a fairly clear indication to caucus and the rest that she's not going to countenance the idea of a permanent ban.
Well, we've just seen, historic multi-generation family-owned cattle properties being put up on the market because they're no longer viable. We've got 80 purely Indigenous cattle stations in far north Queensland, the Northern Territory and the Pilbara. Finding another job in far north Queensland when you get turned off a cattle station is not an easy thing to do. And so I think while there are these stated objectives of getting the trade going, again, we know Joe Ludwig arrived at the first meeting with the Indonesians to hand out Australia's sort of veterinary standards, handed them all out in English. And the Indonesians were completely perplexed because they said, well, how can we have a discussion if we can't even read the document? So this basic level of competency and urgency doesn't seem to be there.
Well, that's the Secretariat's problem, isn't it? I mean, that's DFAT, Foreign Affairs and Trade people on the job in Jakarta who should have fixed that problem, shouldn't they?
Well, look, there is just this overriding sense of competence about this government. It's like the weak guy in the back line who can't catch a pass.
But that's not government. That's a bureaucracy, isn't it, Ross?
Well, I mean, whether you say that about pink bats, about the education revolution, about putting together a package for the mining industry, I mean, everywhere they go, if we look at what's happening in Malaysia, in relation to people, I mean, there's this constant tendency to make announcements before deals are done and then to try and scramble around and backfill. Today we've had the same thing where Tony Windsor has come out in deep frustration at Julia Gillard's announcement of the compensation measures for carbon, when he says, well, look, we haven't agreed to that. Here you have the multi-party committee. You've asked us to come and advise to put together a consensus package, and you're going out making all these announcements. He says you're compromising the negotiating process, and it's typical of this government. It's happened again and again and again.
Far be it from me to defend Julia Gillard because I don't usually find myself in that position. However,
Somebody should.
I do think that, in particular with this cattle trade, this is an indictment on the incompetence of the industry. It is their business to understand that their product is being appallingly mistreated in a way that is going to create... I mean, any straight from university marketing graduate could have said to them, warning, warning, danger, danger, you need to fix this, otherwise it will come unstuck. Whether it was under John Howard's government, whether it was under Kevin Rudd, whether it was under Julia Gillard, it is the industry's responsibility. Quite frankly, it is the producer's responsibility. They ought to know what's happening to their beasts.
On the fix issue, the Prime Minister said today it's Team Australia working on this. Fiona Ellis-Jones, who's she talking about?
Well, Team Australia is basically herself, Foreign Minister Kevin Rudd, who's heading to Indonesia next week, Joe Ludwig, of course, the Agriculture Minister, who Ross touched on, whose behaviour in the past couple of weeks has really been under the microscope today. They'll also be joined by Dr Craig Emerson. So, look, the questions today have really shifted to Ludwig's performance. There have also been questions from Tony Abbott as to why Julia Gillard hasn't got on the phoned her counterpart, President Cecilio Bang Yudhoyono, and resumed the trade or discussed options and ways to resume it herself.
Kevin Rudd, though, Ross Cameron, is today in Burma.
Well, look, if this is Team Australia, here we have an unfolding crisis in Malaysia over people smugglers. We've got the greatest challenge to Australia's bilateral relationship with Indonesia since East Timor. We've got Papua New Guinea in crisis with the end of Sir Michael Somari's prime ministership, and attempts to get Manus Island back off the ground. So we've got three of our immediate neighbours with major challenges, strategic, important questions to Australia. And so where is our Foreign Minister? Is he in Port Moresby, in Kuala Lumpur and in Jakarta? No. He is in Equatorial Guinea, Burma and Kazakhstan. Now, one can't help forming the view that Kevin Rudd is on a bit of a go-slow, and he's kind of saying to his colleagues, you guys knifed me, I'm not going to come back and fix all the messes you make.
Jane?
Sounds like a fairly astute summary to me. I just keep seeing him on that unicycle with the whatever that thing is, yeah.
OK, we move on. A deal on the carbon tax could be just weeks away. The Greens leader Bob Brown has confirmed the multi-party Climate Change Committee has reached agreement on major sticking points, but it's not signed and sealed just yet.
We're working on it still. I said last week that we had some big hurdles to cross. Well, one or two of those have been crossed, but the finishing line's still away from us.
Well, today the Prime Minister seemed to be using new tactics and new language to sell the carbon price.
What Tony Abbott likes to refer to as a carbon tax, a fixed price period for an emissions trading scheme, is a period I believe should be as short as possible. Can I say to Australians, the debate that they are hearing about a carbon tax is a debate about what Tony Abbott calls a carbon tax, which will be for a limited period of time, and then we will move to an emissions trading scheme, which I support, John Howard supports, Malcolm Turnbull supports.
Well, Tony Abbott has renewed his call for a fresh election over the issue, accusing the Prime Minister of being tricky.
A carbon tax is a tax. An emissions trading scheme is a tax. If these things work like a tax, look like a tax and cost like a tax, they are taxes. And the Prime Minister can play all the word games she likes. But what her policy means is that everyone's cost of living increases and everyone's job is less secure.
Tony Abbott, we'll just deal with the Prime Minister's comments today first. Fiona Ellis-Jones, how is the PM's language changing here?
It's hard to keep up, isn't it? No longer a carbon tax. Politically, possibly a very smart move. Tony Abbott's been very, very effective over the last 6 months in staying on message with regards to the carbon tax, the effect that's going to have on, everyday consumers. The cost of electricity, the cost of living is going to go up. So by turning the attention back to an ETS, possible ETS, which today we learn could be introduced as early as 2015, by turning the attention back to an ETS,